Our Generation Gap videos aim to uncover specific needs and highlight possible actions to help plan and achieve future financial goals, dependent on the age group you fall into. In this Generation Gap video, we're going to take a look at Gen Z. Gen Zs were born between 1997 and 2012. So they're either just starting Year 7 at secondary school or they're in their mid-20s. This is a group that is understandably concerned about our planet, ethically aware, passionate about work-life balance, and they might prefer a kombucha, fermented tea with suggested health benefits, to a cocktail, and they can floss with ease. That's the dance move popularised by the console game Fortnite.
Stuart, what would you say are the main priorities for a Gen Z client who is confused and possibly intimidated by the complexities of financial service matters?
Complexities for Gen Z and finance, I think, are considerable, but I think that's only through poor media. I do think from an educational perspective, we need to strip it back and actually help them more at school in terms of what finance is all about, what the journey looks like and could look like, because quite clearly it's going to change as they pass through various periods in their life of career and property and family, etc. So I think just the awareness, which hopefully will eradicate the fear, because I do think there's an awful lot of fear and concern in a Gen Z about finance and about the world full stop, and about being potentially let down by the silent generation in terms of some of the political decisions that have been taken which they see as affecting their future. So I think that's what makes them very strong on ethical issues and impact. But I think from what I witness, sometimes they come to it from a lack of awareness. So it's to try and instill that awareness through education, and for us as financial planners to welcome that as isolation, as potential clients rather than just the son or daughter of a client, and therefore being a diet version, dare I say, of the client. No, that they are the future, but understand that their needs and their concerns are very different to the average age of our client, which is probably somewhere between 45 and 65.
We don't seem to have learnt about educating young people through the school system and college and beyond with financial matters. It's very much, right, there you are into the big wide world, now go for it. And you rely on your natural sort of support group around you to be able to give you that advice.
I think the whole financial education piece, like education full stop without being too political, is a bit of a mess. And I think therefore children are reliant on parents and grandparents on sharing their thoughts. But our time was very different, and I think we've got to be very careful that we don't suggest that what was right for us will necessarily be right for our children. But I would agree, I think schools can embrace this, and I think it's also to do with community and local organisations getting involved and going in, rather than just on decision making in terms of future roles and future careers, which we get invited into schools on a regular basis, but it's more about educational formats. And actually what's relevant to an 11-year-old is just an awareness of probably what the next 12, 13, 14 years look like. So it's going to be understanding student finance, understanding a bank account, understanding from them rather than just telling them what does ethical mean to them, what does impact mean to them. But I would, again, keep it really simple. And I think then we have children who are running towards finance rather than at the moment it feels like they're running away from it.
You touched on one point in your answer about property, and for the more mature, obviously for the more mature Gen Zs, those in their mid-20s, probably living at home, maybe they're renting, but the Gen Zs face a great challenge when it comes to accommodation if the ownership is top of their mind, given the property prices, the average property prices. How might they plan to afford that?
A flippant answer would be never, but I think in terms of, we've got a lot of rebound kids at the moment in terms of children being forced financially to return home and build up their nest eggs for that deposit on a property. So I think, again, it's understanding what their priorities are on the property ladder and making it realistic. I think as a generation, we've had best part of 15, 20 years of very low interest rates, therefore low mortgage rates, and that's become the norm. But I remember when I left school at 18, joined Barclays, joined Norwich Union, which became Aviva. We bought our first house in '88, and before mortgage interest rate relief at source disappeared, and we paid an interest rate of 15%. So sometimes I think it's down to us, going back to the educational point earlier, is to share that with them, that although they could be paying 5 or 6 or 7% interest now, if they've been successful in amassing cash for that deposit, that is significantly a higher interest rate than would have paid 6, 12 months ago. But actually it's a long way below where their parents probably paid. So it's just to share that pain happens sometimes, and it's a commitment. And I think it's trying to get the message across where we are a have-now society, and sometimes you can't have it now, you have to save. A little bit old school, but you have to save. You've got higher mortgage rates, you've got higher credit cards. There needs to be greater discipline. So through greater discipline, you can amass cash if you've got a robust job and if you've got support from home because you're living at home. And with that cash will come choices. Now that you may make a choice to get onto the property ladder, and that's fantastic, but the average property price now is significant. And obviously earnings haven't kept pace with that. The baby boomers and silent generation are going to be, their capital base could well help the Gen Zs in terms of how they get on the property ladder, because without support from other family members, it could be very, very difficult. There could be a glimmer of hope with 100% mortgages, but it's dangerous. I remember in the mid-90s, and I was working for a law firm, and banks particularly were going after young lawyers, and they were offering them 125% mortgages. And because obviously their earnings curve was going to be incredibly steep if they were successful, but not everybody is. So there were some dangerous products around, and I would put 100% in there. Again, coming back to the previous point of budgeting, I think is key for all generations. And just not saving is a poor discipline. And therefore the fact that you can have had 100% mortgage, actually I think sends the wrong message. I understand that it may suit certain banks, but I would rather see a minimum deposit of 10 to 25% to encourage that discipline of saving.
Another point with Gen Zs is that they're noted for having a much greater ethical approach to life other than the older generations. How can they ensure a consistent approach in financial matters, taking that on board?
Gen Zs will look for the consistency of how they allocate monies and make decisions ethically, and they will look in a far deeper, more forensic, research-driven way than other generations. But the information is not always easy to find, and again, ethical, sustainable impact, they're subjective terms. So I think one has to be very careful. We would like to see more kite marking available, so it's easier for all consumers to understand what is truly ethical. Obviously, you've got the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I would expect to see, dare I say, truly ethical suppliers, potential for them to be clients of, will have links to that and can demonstrate that. Whereas I feel at the moment there's a lot of words, this is what we would like to be doing but not doing. Gen Zs will see straight through that.
So it's a bit like the fair trade branding, but for financial products.
Yes, yeah, I think that the fair trade, is another. I'm a real fan of kite marks. It doesn't make it a guarantee that, but it's like with any gene pool in terms of if you know it's gone through a series of filters, you should get a more robust outcome. And the robust outcome here being a genuine ethical individual who wants to make sure they're investing in an ethical way. So I remember from my generation, in terms of growing up as being what would be a Gen Z now, in terms of people were anti-Barclays at the time purely from an apartheid perspective. And therefore, although Barclays seemed to be all over campus, up and down the country in terms of universities, students would be loath to use them because of the apartheid links. And now I think Barclays will struggle for different reasons, because they are the largest bank that's in Europe banking fossil fuel companies. Now, most Gen Zs will know that. So it's unlikely to see a Gen Z using a Barclays bank for that reason. But for me, it's interesting, well, how do the Barclays and the BPs and the Shells of this world start to transition, not just to keep the Gen Zs happy, but they need to be anyway, because they can still keep their shareholders happy. But actually as part of that transition piece, because you will have Gen Zs who will not invest with you, and they are quite clearly the spenders of the future.
You're in an elevator, you've got a Gen Z in the elevator, you've got a few floors to go, they realise what you do for a living, and just asked you, what should I do? So you've got a couple of floors where you've just got to give them some top advice to take away. What would you suggest?
I think I'd focus on the educational point in terms of understanding. I think they can feel lectured at and not listened. So I think the thing is to understand what they believe that I've got a fairly good idea through 30 odd years of experience of financial planning what it should be, but I think it's about listening to them. But I think understand where they are on the educational journey from a finance perspective. I don't mean where they're doing their degree or where they think they'll be doing their degree. I mean understand what is important to them. And for me, the big takeaway is the budget. I mean, them budgeting in terms of and planning for the future. If you budget, if you work out what money's coming in, what's going out, whether you're 18 or whether you're 68, it's a really good discipline to get into, and will see you in a fairly robust place for the future.